keep on running. I keep on running. I keep on running. Running. Non-stop till they out of breath. Putting in about 1,000 reps. Addicted to the grind like a pound of meth. Schneider-Weiler, how I climb the best.
Welcome to the Football Camino. It is such a pleasure to be with you all today, wherever in the world you are listening. The Football Camino is dedicated to taking you on a football journey with football's most interesting players, coaches, trainers, club personnel, and journalists. Think of these as mini autobiographies. Each guest will show you how they got where they are now, reveal their techniques for success, and what they've learned along the way. Today's guest is BT play-by-play announcer Ian Darke. Darke has been calling sports for more than 40 years, and he's called every season of the Premier League. Before he worked for BT, he worked as a commentator for Sky Sports, where he also did boxing. He's called every World Cup since 1982 and has voiced some of the game's biggest goals. He called the Landon Donovan winner over Algeria in the 2010 World Cup, and Sergio Aguero's last-minute goal to win Manchester City the title in 2012, just to name a few of his big calls. In the interview, he talks about where he was during England's World Cup win in 1966, his early broadcasting career struggles, his special pre-game preparations, a recurring dream he has, his most hated commentating cliché, and he even does a bit of announcing during the interview. He actually announces a couple times. Without further ado, enjoy my chat with the legendary Ian Darke. I am here with Ian Darke. We're on the outside of a cricket field in beautiful Claygate. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well indeed, and this is a perfect location for us to talk because I think, as you know, I love cricket as well as football. Yes,
we were just talking about that. I want to, get back to your roots. You're a big Portsmouth fan.
Yep.
What are your first memories of football and maybe watching your Portsmouth play?
Well, I was born in Portsmouth. In fact, I was born in the hospital next to Fratton Park in the year that they last won the title. They were champions of England that year, and we used to live about half a mile away. When I got old enough, and to my dad, that was when I was about 4, he took me to Fratton Park to see the last 20 minutes of the game. They used to open the gates and let you in free to watch the last 20 minutes. So he would take me down there, sit me on his shoulder, and I can remember watching Portsmouth playing Sunderland. It was a 3-3 draw, and my eyes were swimming in amazement, looking at the crowd. It was winter. It was the last few minutes, so the floodlights were on even then. And I just thought, this is absolutely incredible. And I think really from that moment I was hooked.
So how old were you at this time?
I was about 4 or 5.
Oh, wow. I mean, it sounds majestic for a 4 or 5-year-old. And then now, of course, you're working in the industry. It's pretty special.
It is, and funnily enough, Fratton Park was also where I first ever did a commentary. I used to be a reporter on the local paper there, the Portsmouth Evening News, and one day the phone call came into the news desk, and somebody from Portsmouth Football Club said, we need somebody to do the commentary for hospital radio because the local fire chief does it normally, but he's ill this week and we can't find anyone to do the commentary. And you're going to have to do the commentary, whoever does it, with Harry Harris, who usually plays in the team, but he's injured this week and he's happy to do it. So is there anyone? So my news editor shouted out, is there anyone who fancies doing this? Ian, you love football, you love Pompey. I said, yeah, I'll have a go. I was pretty nervous about it. So that was the first ever commentary I did. We found out later that because of a technical hitch, nobody'd heard it, but I enjoyed it thoroughly.
That's what we all dream of, calling games for the hospital.
Well, that's how it was. And the DJ used to come on at halftime, and I think he got sacked because he played that record that the Frank Sinatra lyric, and now the end is near, and it was for somebody, unfortunately, who was critically ill and later died.
Oh my gosh.
He got fired.
What a start! What a start! Well, I'm curious because I don't get to talk to many people who have kind of lived through it. But you were a teenager when England won the World Cup.
Yeah.
I'm curious, just what was that like?
Well, it was incredible, really. The weird thing is, at the time, we'd moved away from Portsmouth. My father had died, and we lived in Buckinghamshire. So I was only 40 minutes on the train from Wembley. But I had no thought at all that I could ever get a ticket or go to the game. So like a lot of people, I watched the game on a black and white television set in the living room at home. And I can remember just being beside myself with excitement when the final whistle went, when Jeff Hurst scored that goal to make it 4, and it was all safe. It was a roller coaster afternoon, but we were punching the air, we were dancing in the street. I think they had a chant back then of "EI Adio, we've won the cup." That was the. It was kind of different then, but it would be so much bigger now if England did it now. But it was huge, absolutely huge, and you're never going to get that experience again, it seems.
well, we shall see with the World Cup next year.
England aren't going to win the World Cup next year.
Are you covering the World Cup next year?
It doesn't look like it at the moment. There's always the possibility you'll get hired as a freelance, but I do have a contract with ESPN in America, who've been covering the World Cups up until now, but they've lost the rights to Fox Sports in America, and they want to go with an all-American commentary team, which is their right and prerogative. So at the moment, my normal gig doing it, I've lost it, but you never know what might come up. I might get a phone call, and of course you always want to be covering the World Cup as a football commentator.
Of course, that's just like a player dreams of it. So does a commentator, of course.
Yeah, you do, and I've covered plenty of them. I guess if there is one to miss, it might be Russia, because the travel could be difficult, and I don't know whether there'll be problems with hooligans, and there's the racism problem there. My own view is, because of the racism problems in Russia, they shouldn't have got the World Cup. Neither should Qatar have got it either, but as they say, that's another story.
Yeah, I mean it's cemented, it's done, it's going to happen.
Yep.
Going back to your early days as a journalist and commentator, what was your first journalism job like? I mean, from what I understand, you were doing more like hard news, non-sports related. And as someone who did it myself for a little bit, it was hard to motivate myself to want to do that. How did you do it?
Like you, I found it hard to motivate myself. I think like you too, I did journalistic college, so we learned about law and learn how to do shorthand and current affairs, and I probably had romantic visions of being a scoop hard news reporter who would be breaking all these big stories. Of course, the reality when you go to work in the real world at a real paper is you get the worst jobs imaginable that's on the diary that day. You're not covering the big stories. You're the guy that's going down to the local council offices where the Lord Mayor is hosting children from the local school, and you've got to somehow try and find a few lines of copy from that. Or occasionally I'd go to the magistrate's court and have to cover some pretty inconsequential cases that would probably make 2 paragraphs in the newspaper the next day if I was lucky. So that's what it was like. You were bottom of the pile, but it knocked a few rough edges off.
And so eventually you made it to Leicester, and kind of that's where your career kind of took off.
In broadcasting, it did.
In broadcasting, that's what I meant.
I kind of broke lucky with that, really, because in between working in Portsmouth and then going to Leicester, I'd become the chief reporter on a weekly paper. Now, there were only 4 reporters on the paper, but I was the chief reporter of them. So on my application to the BBC, it looked rather good, and they said, "Hey, you're the chief reporter at 23?" I said, "Well, yeah," as I was economic with the truth, I guess. So I got picked out of about 200 people to get this job as a reporter on Radio Leicester doing news and sport.
Yeah, sometimes, you gotta kind of have to, twerk the truth a little bit.
I think so, yes. I think it's allowed, isn't it?
Yeah, I think everyone does
Everyone needs a break somewhere.
And so early on in your career, what is something that you struggled with, and how did you overcome it?
Well, I think I'd say struggled with broadcasting, really. First of all, I remember being pretty much a nervous wreck going down, having to read the news for the first time live on air on the channel. I'd done one or two other things, but this was different again, and getting used to interviewing people with a microphone in your hand. It's not easy. You need to do it for a lot of time before you can even relax in front of that microphone and start to perform. So I think just that very act of doing that. But I also remember having to get up early in the morning. My home was about an hour away, driving through the fog and ice at 5 a.m. to get there for 6 a.m. to do the breakfast shift on the news. So it was hard, long hours, not great pay, but you learned a lot.
Is there anything that challenges you now?
Yeah, everything. I think every day challenges you. I think if you think you've cracked this business, it doesn't matter how long you've done it, you're deluding yourself. There's always something else that can come and catch you out. So you need to have your wits about you, and I think you need to still stay a little bit nervous. Nervous is probably not the right word. You need to have the adrenaline flowing still, I think, to perform. You can switch off too much.
Can you give me a specific example of a challenge you've had recently?
Well, maybe commentating on South Korea is I think any commentator would tell you that's difficult for a commentator from the West, because it's very, very hard to get the names of the players into your head, because they all seem to be an amalgam of things like Song, Hyung, Kim.
Yeah.
And so it's very, very difficult, and you have to, I find you have to keep looking down at your notes. And you know, the players, most of them have an appearance of, they're about 5'9". They've got very smart, dark hair. They're quick players. So it's hard to find too many distinguishing marks between them, which you can do with quite a lot of teams. But yeah, that's certainly one test, I think, for any commentator. And then, you know, like commentating on teams you've never seen.
Yeah.
Like I think I had to do the women's Equatorial Guinea team. You haven't got notes on those players. You haven't seen them. You've somehow got to find some bit of video or go and watch them train, if they'll let you go and watch them train, so that you can do the simple job of, well, not so simple job as it turns out, of identifying them as the game's going on.
Yeah, I mean, not exactly a whole lot of household names on the Equatorial Guinea women's team.
Absolutely none, and people will always say to you, people who don't do my job as a commentator, well, it doesn't matter if you get it wrong. Nobody's going to know. Well, that's probably true, but your professional pride says you want to get it right.
Of course, you don't, and even if it's just the one person, you know, that can, you know.
Well, I heard the story, and I'm not going to name any names here, of a commentator who commentated on water polo at the Olympic Games, again involving South Korea, and in the end gave up trying to identify the players and just made up the names throughout the whole broadcast, and to this day nobody has noticed. But those of us in the commentary community do know it happened.
I would just love to hear that. I mean, it's actually difficult to make up names on the fly.
I think the gentleman concerned's gone on to have a very good career, so I'm not going to spoil it now.
So I mean, you've had a number of color commentators that you've had good working relationships with. How do you develop those relationships, and is it kind of sort of like a marriage?
I don't think it's like a marriage. That wouldn't be the correct description. How do you develop that relationship? Well, hopefully you get on quite well with that person off air as well. I think if your dagger's drawn and you're two very, very different people, I think it's inevitable that tension will surface on air. So there needs to be a little bit of a rapport between you, and that can sometimes develop just when you're having a meal or a coffee or lunchtime of the event. You're just talking over the game. And then on air, it's weird how somehow people kind of know when to come in, when not to come in. I've done fair few commentaries with people who've never done it before. I remember doing one with Dion Dublin. I'll name him, great guy. But he said to me, I've never done this before. And I had to show him right there and then. So I said, don't talk when the ball's in the penalty area, basically. It might be a goal scored. If you're talking as the ball's going into the net, it's going to look bad. So try to keep your comments pithy. Try to be sort of colourful and, you know, quite pungent with them as well. And he did fine on the day. But I do feel, as a commentator who does the play-by-play, that a lot of ex-footballers are hired. Really, they need to do a bit of training first, do some matches, do some dummy commentaries, just to get the rhythm and feel of it. And I think that the people concerned, the players concerned, would appreciate that as well, because nobody would ask me to go and play centre forward for England. So why would they be able to just go on and do football commentary at a high level? I mean, poor Phil Neville got murdered in the press and the media because the first ever co-commentary, I think he did, was an England World Cup game with an audience of, of millions and millions, and everybody's going to hear it. You don't want to be doing that. You want to do your first commentary really where hardly anybody's listening, and you can knock a few of the rough edges off and get the general idea of it. And of course, Phil's gone on to have a very good media career since.
Yeah, I mean, comedians don't start in the 20,000 person stadium. They start in the smaller venue, work out some of the kinks, and make it to the big time.
And that's the way you want to do it, really.
Yeah. How much time do you spend with your color commentators outside of the game?
Well, I've got on well with them in more recent times. Michael Owen, he'll sometimes share some tips from his racing stable with me and send me the odd text if I ask him, how's that horse of yours going to run today? Michael was very gracious indeed. He came all the way down one night from Cheshire, no fee, to appear at a charity function my wife was doing, and everybody around here loved him for that. And he was wonderful, and he stayed till midnight, and then we got him a car home. So yeah, I've got on great with Michael, and Steve McNamaman's a big mate, and he even stayed at my house one night and went to the local fish and chip shop to have a meal with me. And ever since, they keep on saying, is Steve McNamaman going to be coming in again? They all wanted their picture taken with him. They couldn't believe he'd come to their fish and chip shop down the road at Chessington. So, yeah, I've got on pretty well with all of them. And you try to do that as well. And you try not to have a friction within the relationship. It's important, really, that you do get on. And I was always taught when I was a young broadcaster, and I worked with people like Peter Jones and Brian Butler, famous old radio commentators in England, and they said, look, son, it's our job to make each other look good on air. So if my co-commentator makes a bad mistake, I'll try to gently correct it within the commentaries, not say, no, you've got that wrong, it's so-and-so, because then you're showing him up. So maybe I'm old-fashioned, but that's my approach anyway.
No, you're being a good professional, good mate. But since you brought up Steve McNamaman, what's something about him that fans don't see, or that maybe you appreciate that the fans don't see watching at home?
Just as a guy, not so much as a commentator. He is a very, very generous-hearted individual. I think people wouldn't realize that. He gives off the impression that, it's all, it doesn't matter, let's get on with it, who cares? But actually, he knows a lot, he sees a lot, and he's very, very caring. I mean, there's one of his best mates drives him sometimes, and Steve will always just put £50 in his hand and say to him, look, you go and get the drinks, so I don't want it to look like I'm buying the drinks.
Yeah.
And there was another thing with Steve, the charity function I mentioned earlier on that he came down and did for us. We had a guy who was the manager of AFC Wimbledon. So Steve McNamaman was auctioning Liverpool and Real Madrid shirts that night, which went for quite a lot of money, signed by him. And the AFC Wimbledon manager was talking as well, and he was auctioning a Wimbledon shirt signed by the Wimbledon players. So I couldn't believe it, but the Wimbledon shirt went to a bit more than the Liverpool or Real Madrid figure in the auction. And I thought, how did that happen? There must be a lot of Wimbledon fans here. What I found out later is that Steve had got the guy who drove him around, Gordon, to bid for those shirts so that it didn't look embarrassing for the guy from Wimbledon. But that's the kind of
that's
fellow
brilliant.
he is. I don't know anyone who doesn't like Macca.
Yeah, and so what would he say about you? if the other, if I asked him the same question?
Well, he always calls me the legend, which is quite complimentary.
I'd say.
He laughs and jokes a lot with me. We have all kinds of jokes. Some of them about Robbie Williams records and things like that. I think I'd like to think he likes me.
Okay.
You'd have to ask him, really.
Yeah. Well, who knows? Hopefully, maybe I will one day. When you prepare for a game, take me through the week. Let's say the game's on a Saturday. You're doing the 5:30 Saturday BT game. Mm-hmm. Take me through the week preceding it.
It starts before that, really, Josh, because once you see coming up on your horizon a team, you'll maybe pay a little bit more attention to that team. I keep notes anyway on every Premier League team and the appearances and goals.
Yeah, I want to get to that in a little bit.
Okay, but all right. So in that week, I will start to look out that team, look out what the formation they've been playing, make sure that I've taped their 2 previous games so I can see what little changes. Then I'll look around and trawl around social media and see what kind of the storylines and talking points around that club are. As the week goes on, you'll start to sort of get a clearer idea of who's injured and who's likely to be in the starting lineup. So I'll probably ring the club's press relations officer and I'll ask and say, is it possible I could have a quick chat with the manager on Friday or maybe Saturday morning, where he may be able to give me a little bit of a steer about what the team's going to be. More and more these days, the answer to that is no, but there's a small group of managers who will still do that and know you and trust you not to divulge anything about what their team's going to be, and will give you a bit of an insight. Sam Allardyce was one. I mean, he's obviously gone into retirement for the moment, but Steve Bruce is another who will help you out like that. They understand that you have a job to do, and they know you've been around a bit of time and have done a lot of games involving their team. So, yeah. So you're building up a picture really of both the teams involved, and read a lot really is another thing. Just read around the game so you've got a really good grip at what's at stake, who's going to play, where the storylines are likely to be. But sometimes you can prepare and prepare and prepare, but nothing will prepare you for what is going to happen in that match.
And so when you're watching those games, I mean, and you're you talked about reading the storylines, but when you're watching those games, is there anything in particular you're looking for? And I don't know if you've talked about it with your color commentators, but how is it different than what they're looking for?
It's a good question, but really, I suppose we're kind of looking at the same things, but your co-commentator would... I always say to the co-commentators, and I think good sports executives will say the same thing to the colour commentators, tell me something that I can't see. I can see that the ball hit the post, I can see that it went wide of the post, that kind of thing. But I want the co-commentator to tell me something that only a professional who played at the highest level could possibly appreciate. And after a while, you hope that they start to do that. As for me, I mean, you're looking, maybe the story in the week has been all about, say, John Terry. So you might be talking, you may look at how is he going to play? Is he going to come in? Is he going to be able to cope with that striker who's got all these goals this week? So there's no telling what that story would be, but there's a topicality angle maybe to the game. But I never ever think you should go in with a preconceived idea of what the game is going to be, because the story may come from somewhere else. So although you've done all that preparation, in a good game you might use very, very little of it. In fact, you probably shouldn't, because although you know a lot, you don't want to be a know-all.
Yeah, you have to be over prepared, but not seem like a
exactly
know-it-all.
That. And I think sometimes commentators who are new to doing the job want to show the audience how much homework they've done, that they know every stat on every player. But in a way, those stats can be quite boring. And when you've used a couple, the rest of them go in one ear and out the other. So with those statistics, my kind of acid test is be sparing with them and make them have a bit of a wow factor. If you use a stat, you want people to sit at home going, blimey, is that right? So it makes a bit of an impact. Whereas if I tell somebody that Lukaku's scored 6 goals in the last 14 games. It doesn't really have too much impact at all. It's not that
Yeah.
bad or good.
Yeah, it doesn't make you think. It doesn't make you think at all.
So I mean, we've all hey, look, I've done loads of commentaries where I've got that balance wrong.
Yeah.
We all have, and you make mistakes, and you've never done the perfect commentary. Never ever, which makes it quite hard when you put the microphone down every day saying, you always think, I wish I'd said more about that. Why did I make that point at that time? It was the wrong time. I should have used that there. But hey, look, it's a 90-minute ad lib, and you do your best.
Okay, so we've talked about some stats, and you brought here today the book that you kind of track a lot of your stats on.
Yeah. This is one from 2 seasons ago that people can't see it, of course. But I mean, like a lot of the commentators, I will keep track of each team in the Premier League and make notes of storylines beside the game. So like I just went to a page, here's Everton from a couple of years ago. So there's all the players. Then Stones was at Everton, so Howard Stones, Jagielka, Distan, Baines, McCarthy, Barry. So little ticks when they played in that game, a little 1 if they scored. You can see Aidan McGeady scored that game against Leicester opening day. Great goal, as I recall it. And on it goes. So there's something for every team. So I can go back. I've got this ever since the Premier League started. I can go back. I can find Paul Scholes' debut and Gary Neville's debut. So
do you, right before the season, all the teams and all the players, and then every week, go through each game and who played, who came up? Because that must be a really time-consuming process.
It isn't that time-consuming. No, once you've got it down and you go through the teams on a Monday morning, I'll do that. I'll go through the games and keep my book up to date. Once you've got the template in, and there's a little bit of work in the summer just setting that up, it's fine. I would say that probably takes 2 hours a week to just keep that up to date, and it's invaluable. And I can check back, from games, previous games between clubs, quite easily. It's all there on my shelf.
And so the other thing I'm curious about this magical book is how do you? I mean, you obviously, if you know 2 teams are playing, you can look at their previous game. But how do you, kind of just recall his last goal was, 8 weeks ago. I mean, I guess it kind of is broken down into date.
It's here in the book, and I should add, we do get statistical help. I mean, at BT Sport, we have Joel Miller, who does he's a brilliant statistician. So he will come up with a lot of lines you wouldn't have got yourself from your books. And sometimes I'll ask him to check something that it might not be in the notes he sent and say, oh, that's interesting. Has he ever played? Yeah. I mean, last year we had a stat going up until about Christmas that Mustafi, the Arsenal side, had never played when they'd lost a game. That went on for about 22 games. There's one going at the moment like Wijnaldum of Liverpool. He's never scored away yet in the Premier League for Newcastle or Liverpool. So I don't know what the story is there. But on it goes. These are little tidbits that you might drop into the commentary without wishing to hammer the player's concern too much, but it is of interest.
And so when you're doing a game, what do you do at halftime? What's your halftime routine?
Always a cup of tea. I have to have a cup of tea with 1 spoonful of sugar.
Any milk? Any milk?
That's the first thing. Make sure you listen to what they're saying in the studio at halftime, because they'll be going over the main talking points, and in BT Sports case we'll have a referee there. It was Howard Webb, it's been Graham Poll, just going through and giving their final verdict on controversial incidents in the half. So you're aware of what the broadcast is saying. You might not agree with their interpretation of it, or their interpretation of it might be slightly different to how we saw it in the commentary, but hey ho, that's the way it goes. So you need to know and be in tune that what has been said. Rio Ferdinand might have a different take on something, and I might even back refer to that in the commentary and just say, that was interesting that Rio said that about So just stay in touch, sip a cup of tea, relax a little bit, maybe look through the substitutes. I will do that a little. Just look through the substitutes and make sure I'm up to date with my notes on them, because now comes a point in the game where they could be introduced.
Of course. And, well, I'm just curious because you mentioned your tea. Do you take your tea with milk, or how do you take your tea?
That's the first time I've ever been asked that question.
Well, I mean,
yes, a little milk, though. Only a little milk.
I mean, I've learned how important people here take their tea. I mean, my fiance's mother, is very particular, and
yes.
It's really important.
Yeah, I don't like milky tea. I don't like it being too milky, and it's got to be hot.
It's got to be hot.
It's got to be hot. It's very welcome. It just soothes your vocal cords a little. Martin Tyler told me you should never have coffee because it sticks to your vocal cords, so he doesn't have coffee. You see,
fun fact. Okay, interesting.
Yeah,
I'll keep that. Keep note of that before I do these podcasts. And never coffee.
I don't know whether it's an old wives' tale, but it was obviously worked for Martin.
So, when I watch a game, I really like the commentary, and I put it up a bit. When you watch a game, are you like paying special attention to the commentary, or does it kind of just repel you and you just have to mute the game, or what? When you watch a game, what is it like?
I try to enjoy it still as a fan, but if I'm honest, you can't help it because your job as a commentator, you are listening and hopefully admiring the commentator. I think we can all learn a little bit from each other, if I'm honest with you. You always want to be yourself, and we all have our own DNA, I think, as commentators. So, and then it's subjective about which style you like. What you don't want is for Twitter to explode and everybody doesn't like your commentary. Hopefully there's a bit of a mix, but yeah, I do listen to other commentators, and I often think, well, that was a good line. I don't know where he got that from, but that's great. Or he obviously got that from the assistant manager beforehand, or the manager gave him a tip, or it was a good bit of research. So yeah, you do, and in a way, I have to say this, it does kind of spoil it because the game becomes a professional observation for you, and it's harder to react as a fan, which is why, going back to Portsmouth, I'll go down there and I'll sit and I'll have my season ticket. I don't want to be anywhere near the media. I want to watch the game and enjoy it as a fan.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great point because, if work becomes your pleasure, it can kind of blur the lines a little bit. Is there someone that you've stolen something from, or stolen's probably the wrong word.
Yeah.
You've learned from like a commentator you admire that you're like, ooh, that's really good. I need to incorporate that more in my repertoire or toolbox.
That's another good question, Josh. I don't think any of us do that consciously, but maybe by osmosis, something comes through into your style, or you might listen back to a commentary and think, do you know what, I'm talking too much. I didn't need to say all that there. It would have been better just to let it breathe there, let people enjoy the game. I always have this thing about you want to be a welcome guest in somebody's living room. You are a guest in their living room, so don't be a bore or somebody who's never shuts up. I suppose if there was an influence on me, it would go back more to my radio days. I grew up and learned a lot at BBC Radio Sport, and there were some very, very great broadcasters there, probably the best of which was Desmond Lynam. And he used to do the boxing commentary. I used to do a bit of boxing too, and so we used to go on the occasional trip together back then, before he went to BBC Television and his career really took off and he became a household name. And he taught me to, I think, maybe relax more. I think in my early days I was probably too in your face, too overexcitable with it. He had a very relaxed attitude to everything. I remember listening to him when one day he was presenting Sports Report. It's like the 5 o'clock famous radio show with the football results, and he said, "It's 5 o'clock, time for Sports Report." And then he looked up at the clock and it wasn't 5 o'clock, it was 1 minute to. And he said, "Do you know what? It isn't 5 o'clock yet, it's 1 minute to 5. I'll tell you what that means. It means I've got to fill in for another minute here, because what happens at 5 o'clock is that all kinds of broadcasters from all over the world join us at exactly that time. So what I've got to do here for half a minute is fill in with a bit of other sports news, which somebody will just hand to me. And here it is. There's a bit of golf news coming in from America. And he filled in with this golf news record. Said, now it really is 5 o'clock and time for sports. And I thought, hey, how cool was that?
Yeah.
How brilliant was that he just ad-libbed that and actually made that fairly bad error into a hugely enjoyable bit of broadcasting.
I mean, as a broadcaster's like nightmare is like having too much time to just like kind of just sit there and you know you have to fill.
Exactly, yeah. Particularly if you're. I used to do the sports desks on at 6:45 on Radio 2 of an evening, and occasionally if you had a bad producer or somebody who wasn't used to doing it, you wouldn't have enough material.
Yeah.
I remember one night I had about 45 seconds to fill. I think I had 2 minutes to fill once at the end of a news bulletin on Radio Leicester.
Which is like an hour in real time.
We had to spread the weather forecast out to last 2 minutes, which just sounded ridiculous.
Yeah.
But there you are. Things like that are sent to try you.
I mean, 30 seconds can feel like a lifetime in television.
Sometimes
and radio.
5 seconds can seem like a lifetime.
Yeah, I mean it's incredible. So you mentioned boxing before. You've to a lot of people may not realize that you were a boxing commentator for a really long time, and from what I understand, one of the best ever. Where did your boxing career or your love of boxing kind of start, and how did that translate into your boxing career?
I used to listen to the fights on the radio. My dad was quite keen, and I adored Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay when I was a kid growing up. Never thought of covering it for a living, not at all. And then I went to the BBC Radio Sports Room, and Desmond Lynam, as I've told you, was the boxing commentator. And then he was on his way to television, so more and more he used to do the commentary. He couldn't do them anymore, so they said to me, "You're the only other guy in the office who seems to have any handle on boxing, really. So why don't you have a go at doing a few boxing commentaries?" So they gave me a tape machine, and I went down to the Royal Albert Hall where they used to have a lot of fights on, and just practiced on my tape machine doing these boxing commentaries. Got them all horrendously wrong, really. Called the wrong winner.
Well, that's why they call practice, right?
Misread the fight. Stuttered. Really didn't have too much rhythm. Wasn't describing the punches correctly. But I suppose bit by bit by bit, by trial and error, I got to have a style that you could use on air. I was still way too inexperienced really to do it, but I had to do some. And the first fight I ever did for BBC Radio, it wasn't a commentary. I had to do all the reports and packages and interviews. At Muhammad Ali, one of his last fights, I think it was his second last fight against Larry Holmes, he took a terrible beating, but it was a heck of a story. And I did a lot of interviews and reports around that.
And and you got to interview Muhammad Ali for that?
And I got to interview Muhammad Ali, and there's a great story. Like when I got there, I'd never been to America. I'd never covered a major boxing match before, so I really was the new kid in town. So I wandered up to the gym where he was doing some training, and he was doing shadow boxing in the ring, and I sort of rather naively went over to the corner where Angelo Dundee was actually working, so I shouldn't really have said anything to him at all. I should have waited till they'd finished, but I didn't.
Yeah.
But I was the new kid, so I said, "Excuse me, Mr. Dundee, I wonder if at some point during the week, I'm from the BBC in England, whether Mr. Muhammad would be available to do an interview with me." He goes, "What?" I said, "Would he do an interview with me?" He goes, "Yeah, of course he would." And then he shouts out to Ali, who's in the ring. He said, "Hey, Muhammad!" He goes, "We got a guy here from England." And then Ali went into this big spiel because he's talking to the crowd as he's shadow boxing. He says, "We got a guy here from England. We got a guy from England. We're going to talk to the guy from England. England's the only place they know about boxing. England's the only place they know I'm the world champion. They never took the championship away from me." He goes, "I want to talk to the guy from England. Let's bring the guy from England up into the ring." So I'm like, now I haven't even thought what the interview's going to be.
This is so much pressure.
I'm just this kid with the tape machine. Yeah. So I walked up into the ring. I was invited. They all clapped me. The crowd clapped me. And I do this interview with Ali. So all I had to ask him was, "How do you think the fight's going to go?" And off he went. And it was because I had to do nothing. He was brilliant, and then I was a hero back home because within hours of arriving in Las Vegas, I'd got an interview with Muhammad Ali. So it all worked. It all worked very well.
I mean, sometimes you just need a little bit of luck, and
it's all downhill after that, isn't it? Really, your career. I was thinking that.
Yeah,
what
right?
do you do after that?
you peaked in your first performance.
Yeah, it's true.
And then, so you eventually did the Holyfield Tyson fight, where Tyson bit off a little bit of Holyfield's ear.
Yes.
And so I'm curious about, in that fight, as mayhem. So in preparation for this interview, I was watching the call of it, and you seem to know pretty immediately what happened. But I'm curious, in the mayhem that ensued, do you have a producer like yelling into your ear, and then how do you speak while he's talking in your ear? You have your co-commentator or your color guy that you're supposed to be interacting with. How do you juggle the person in your ear with the commentator next to you?
Well, the producer on that occasion wasn't saying very much at all. Usually, and I like this, they let you get on with it because you've called a lot of fights or football matches. But if there's some guidance that's needed, sometimes the producer will say, can you recall any other, scandals on this sort of scale?
Yeah.
Things like that. But on that night, no, I think really we stayed pretty close to what was going on, and you got to talk to the pictures on TV as well. So we were talking to the pictures of an outraged Holyfield, the referee, the size of the scandal, the unraveling of Tyson. What it was probably going to mean for him. I always remember that night on American TV. They had a guy called Jim Gray doing the interviews.
Yeah, I know Jim Gray.
Yeah, do you know Jim?
I mean, he's famous for several interviews. He's very famous in the States.
He's the only guy I've ever heard as he was trying to interview Tyson. Don King, promoter, kept trying to interrupt the interview and was trying to edit it himself. And Jim turned around at one point and just said, "Don, please shut up." which you're a hero for doing that.
There are probably so many people who wish they had done that themselves.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like Larry Merchant with Floyd Mayweather that time when he said, "If I was 20 years younger, I'd kick your butt."
Yeah. Well, while we're on the boxing vein, I'm curious: are you going to watch the Floyd Mayweather Conor McGregor fight?
No, I'm going to make a very big effort not to. I think it's a sham. I think it's just commercial gimmickry. I'm not interested in it.
Yeah, no,
I really am not, and I don't like things like that. I understand they're going to make loads and loads and loads of money. So, good luck to both of them. They can put it in the bank. Not that Mayweather needs that money, and it may be generational. I know there's a whole lot of people out there who want to see what happens, and they've built it up brilliantly, really, in that regard. But I don't think it's proper, authentic sport. Sorry if that sounds like snobbery.
No, not. I'm sure your view is shared by many.
I think it is. Yeah.
And so, how was commentating boxing different than commentating football? And is there anything that you learned about either football or commentating on boxing from commentating on boxing?
Not really, because a lot of football commentary, or probably 90% plus of it, is identification of the players. The rest of it, in a way, is trimmings, but the trimmings are really important. The trimmings are probably what separates an average commentator from a good one, and a good one from a very good one, and a very good one from a brilliant one. So, I think they are pretty different. I mean, the big thing with boxing is you don't obviously have an identification problem, but you do have the problem of trying to give people an idea of who's winning the fight. Of course, you don't know the scorecards. A couple of the organizations have had this business of revealing after so many rounds, but generally you didn't know what the scorecards were. So you're trying to give people an idea of who you think is winning the fight. So you've got to be reading it pretty well. Yeah, I was tried to give an insight into what the psychology and mentality of that particular fighter might be, or how he might be thinking or going about his job at that moment in the contest. They're pretty different sports, but of course the same broadcasting skills would go into them in terms of you want people to be interested, really, and to engage them. I think is important to make them care. Somebody once advised me, it's not a bad bit of advice, this: make me care who wins.
Yeah.
I don't know these two teams that are going on my TV. Give me some stories that make me care about one of them. Or, yeah, I want that guy to win. The guy whose wife died 3 weeks ago of cancer, and how he was at her bedside for 2 weeks and had to miss training. I want him to win.
Yeah, make me care about a Stoke West Ham game.
Yeah, exactly.
Or,
so
like,
I always think if I did
why am I tuning in?
Yeah, if you were giving a commentary for a young broadcaster to do a test on, I would give them a 0-0, as you said, something like that. West Bromwich Albion v Stoke. I've nothing against those teams, but you know what I mean. Rainy night at Blackburn, something like that. A dull game where wasn't a lot going on. That's a bit more of a test of a commentator than a 3-3 draw. Often when you get a reaction for a commentary, so they'll go, God, it was a great commentary last night. It was brilliant. And usually it was a game that was a 4-4 draw or something, or there was a dramatic finish. What they actually mean was the game was good, so you're glad you didn't spoil it.
Yeah.
But nobody ever says really, or except a commentator will notice, I would notice, I say, that was good. He did a good job on that because there was very little going on, and he kept me interested in a few subplots.
Yeah. It's something that I'm curious, we're talking about kind of mistakes, or not mistakes, ways that, commentators can make things better. But one of the things that really grinds my gears is cliches. And I know at journalism school, that was like the first thing they tried to beat out of every reporter was cliches. Are there any cliches that you hate as listening when you're a commentator? I'll give you my personal favorite one that I hate, which was he has to at least put that one on goal, or on target, which is just like
we've all said that, and I think probably a lot of ex-players have said that, but you're right, it's obvious. And football fans probably now, if you want to go back 30, 40, 20 years maybe, this is quite a knowledgeable generation of football fans. They watch a lot of games, a lot of players. They go through social media and websites looking up things about players, so it's probably a bit more knowledgeable. So you're quite right, something like that. Think about it, it's a statement of the obvious, and I think fair enough. I mean, to answer your question, I never made no mistake with the penalty.
Yeah.
There are plenty of them, and we've all been guilty of using them. Sometimes you see it coming up like an iceberg in the commentary ahead of you, but nothing else quite comes to mind, and out it comes. So apologies.
It's unavoidable, at times. But I would be remiss as an American if I didn't ask you about probably your most famous call. The Landon Donovan goal in the 2010 World Cup against Algeria.
In America, anyway.
In America, I'm sorry.
Yes,
I should have led with that. How does it feel knowing that your voice is tied to probably the most famous sporting event in U.S. soccer history, and knowing that I know I'll tell my kids about that moment. I remember exactly where I was and what I was doing, and I'll tell even my grandkids. How does it feel knowing that you're so tied to a piece of history like that?
It's quite humbling, actually, because I did that commentary that day on Landon Donovan's basically saving the USA in the World Cup. It's stoppage time against Algeria. They're going out the World Cup. Suddenly they're not going out the World Cup. They score with almost the last kick of the game, and now they're top of the group, even ahead of England.
Yeah.
And I think that was a moment where a lot of people who probably didn't get the game in America started to get it a little bit. Oh, I get it. There's nothing happens. And then there's this amazing moment like that, this through the roof moment. So I hadn't heard it back, and I only became aware that it was getting lots and lots of airtime and comment almost by second hand. People saying to me in the bar when I got back to the hotel, saying, "Oh, your commentaries, wow, it's that was amazing what you did there." I said, "Was it? I don't know. I honestly couldn't remember what I'd said in the moment." So then I started getting phone calls from radio stations in America wanting me to do interviews, and then the ESPN press guy said, "Oh, when are you going to be available? We need you to do this and about this call." And I said, well, I said, this is incredible. I was disbelieving, and in a way I still am, but I'm very thankful that Hey, well, that's a phone. That isn't, by the way, that isn't Jose Mourinho.
If it was, I would tell you to stop the podcast right now and pick it up for sure.
Yeah.
So that event, obviously, a massive event in U.S. soccer, and also, in a way, obviously, your career as well. When you were younger, either a child or starting off in your career, did you ever practice, the last second call or the dramatic call that would kind of reverberate in history?
No, I can honestly say I didn't. I think probably subconsciously I was even then listening to the commentary, and obviously you mentioned the 1966 World Cup final, and that is probably the most famous line of commentary ever in the history of English sport. Kenneth Wolstenholme saying as the ball is crossing the halfway line, and there are
I've never heard it.
Well, you've got to learn this, and that's why.
Wait, can you do it for me?
I can't do it in Kenneth Wolstenholme's voice, and I wouldn't be that presumptuous. But what he said was, as it was 3-2 to England. The game is still on a bit of a knife edge, and everyone's nervous, particularly as Germany had equalised in the last minute of normal time, but it's the last minute of extra time now. Bobby Moore clears the ball to Jeff Hurst. So the commentary goes, and here's Hurst now. He's bearing down on goal. And there's some people on the pitch. They think it's all over. And as he's saying that, Hurst explodes a shot into the roof of the net. It is now. So it was just, again, you can't prepare for that. The commentator's words and the action just clicked at that moment. Now, of course, it's a brilliant bit of commentary, and they even had a comedy panel show a few years ago, sporting panel show called "They Think It's All Over." So it's there in folklore, and Kenneth Wolstenholme's name is enshrined forever.
I'll have to look it up when I get back home.
Yes. Just put "They Think It's All Over. It is now" into your search engine, and you'll be able to hear it.
Fantastic. And so your first World Cup, if I'm not mistaken, was 1982 in Spain.
Yep.
And obviously you did the last one in 2014 in Brazil. As you've gotten older, which one is better, the first experience or the most recent one?
I love them all, really. The World Cup is just my favourite event to cover. Yeah. The first one I covered, I was really largely studio bound, doing mostly presentations, so that wasn't a fantastic experience. It wasn't a great World Cup in Spain, though it had a couple of really outstanding matches in it. So I'd say my favourite one was South Africa 2010, really. My first, I did the 1994 one for ESPN years ago, but the 2010 World Cup with the Landon Donovan goal, and it was very exciting, and the country was beautiful.
So is there any other reason, or it was beautiful? I mean, I can imagine first one in Africa, obviously, but
there was all that.
Is there any other reason, or?
No, just the feel of it, and I liked being in France in 1998, getting the trains everywhere like we did at the Euros last year, and they always ran to the minute on time. The travel is important, I think, when you're at a World Cup. You want your travel to be smooth. You don't want to be delays and looking at your watch, because it's hard enough with the travel and all the prep and keeping up to date with everything without having a load of headaches trying to get aeroplanes. I mean, I think in Brazil we got 19 flights, internal flights, and we always seem to be in row 37, seat C, sitting crammed in on a seat on a trip to Recife or somewhere to cover another game. But people complained about it, and I always say the same thing. You're sitting having a coffee in an airport, and I say, hey, look, come on, guys, we're covering the World Cup.
Yeah,
we're covering the World Cup. Yeah, so there's a lot of people out there who'd love to be having the problems we're having.
Well, since you travel so much for covering these games, is there something that you can't leave home without?
Well, my pens and books and background notes, that's important.
Anything maybe non-professionally, or?
Oh, I see. Yeah. I have to have music. Yeah, I'd have the songs I like.
What songs are you listening to?
Oh, well, I'm quite eclectic taste. I quite like David Gray.
Never heard of him.
Never heard of David Gray? Oh,
no.
Perhaps he's getting old then. Yeah, this I think is this is probably generational. Oh, I've got a whole mix of stuff. I've
Is he
even got
like
some
a-
Eminem stuff on there somewhere. I listen to music and I think, yeah, that's good. I'll put it on. So there's obviously a lot of stuff from the '60s as well, but I like some modern stuff too. Don't ask me to name all the artists. I can never remember them. But a lot of them my son's taught me. So I sometimes get them. His music comes up on mine because we share the same account.
Okay,
So
yeah.
I have to weed it.
Oh, that's
Weed it
that's
through. I
funny.
said,
Yeah.
"Oh, Arcade Fire, yeah, that's good. I like that."
Yeah.
I said
I'll take that. Yeah.
He played me a few tracks. So my colleagues at ESPN were quite impressed. That they said, "Who do you like?" So Arcade Fire, pretty good. You know Arcade Fire?
I mean, I've never even heard of Arcade Fire.
I'm messing. They're
so-
Canadian.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. They're obviously not as big as I thought.
No, they probably are. I mean, I'm just I'm not a huge music lover of this generation, so
Okay. All right.
um,
So yeah, that binoculars important for any commentator.
okay, so you use binoculars
Well,
when
the
you
warm-ups are really important for a commentator. The one big plus, the game's probably got very hard to call. These days, a lot of players you have to prepare, but you do have the players are out there for half an hour before the game warming up, so you can get your binoculars. Say, well, he looks a bit like him, but he's got green boots.
yeah.
He's wearing red boots. Okay, so those two are the two strikers. All right. You put a lot of things in your head. I think all the commentators will tell you that. So just have a look at them and check he hasn't dyed his hair all blonde since the last game. I mean, Romania turned up famously at the 1998 World Cup, and they'd all dyed their hair blonde. That was one of my best lines of commentary, by the way. Though I say so myself, when Romania went out of the World Cup in 1998, I think they were beaten by Croatia. And I said, I think proof here that blondes don't always have more fun.
That is quite quippy, yeah. Quite witty.
I don't do it often, but that one came to me somehow.
When it comes to traveling, do you have any horror stories, or do you have any tips that you'd give to someone who's traveling to all of these events?
It amazes me that more commentators in history haven't failed to get there on time for games, given the amount of delays and air traffic problems you can have. I mean, simple advice is leave plenty of time. You don't want to be on the train looking at your watch, wondering if you're going to get there. So I always look to get to the ground about 3 hours to go.
But you've never almost missed a match.
Only in nightmares. I do have a recurring nightmare that I'm wandering around a ground trying to find my way from the tunnel area where we get the teams when they're announced up to the gantry, which can be a long way away, via several lifts, elevators and stairs, and you can't find the way. And I've had this nightmare for many years that the game's going on, there have been 2 goals in the first 5 minutes, but you haven't been anywhere near that microphone. You're still trying to find your way to the gantry. Luckily, it hasn't happened yet in real life.
And your dream is Steve McNamaman just doing a one-man broadcast?
Something like that, yeah. And they're screeching at you, where were you? Where were you? No, you hope it never happens. So you do your best, but sometimes, say there's a Champions League game on a Wednesday night in Italy, you've probably got to go on the Tuesday. I mean, UEFA have a rule with the teams that they have to be there the day before the game, and it's for that reason, because if the next day there's fog or travel problems, they're going to make it on time. So commentators should do the same, but sometimes the logistics of it are, you might be covering a game in Kiev on Tuesday and be at Old Trafford on Thursday. So it's a long journey back from Kiev, so you need everything to go. You need everything to go smoothly.
When it comes to fans, you at this point know American fans really well. Obviously, you know British fans. What is the difference between either how they cheer, how they support their clubs, how they support their national teams? Well, actually, maybe let's. We all know how England supports their national team, but how would you compare and contrast them?
Well, I think the American fans, I'm impressed by them. These groups like the American Outlaws, they really make an occasion of it. They have the tailgate parties, they have the pep rallies the day before, and they really get behind the team. I think they're a bit less carping and critical England fans really live in a state of almost constant depression and frustration because the expectation levels are so high. I think with the US, maybe that's just starting to come into the American scene a little bit more, where the expectation levels on the team are a little higher than they used to be, sometimes unrealistically so. So I hope they don't get like that, but I think the American fans have got much more knowledgeable and they create a great atmosphere. The English fans just live in hope.
Yeah. So what's I want to just get into some quick hitter questions before I let you go. What's your greatest achievement
in commentary?
Yeah, I mean, if there's something else that you've done, like
running the London Marathon.
Oh.
I ran the London Marathon
in
1987. So I just wanted, I don't know what, it was a time of my life. I wanted to do it. I trained for months on end and I did do it. So I was in tears when I completed that day. I know lots of people probably listening to this have probably done it 10 times, and you know, lots of people have, and I think anybody could. But yeah, I felt very, very proud of that, doing that.
I mean, that's no easy feat. I've never done it. Like
But you could. You could if you train.
But that's something you have to train for like months. And
yeah, you do.
You know,
you have to train. You have to do the training.
I mean, anyone could, fly a plane if they have enough
Except
training.
Steve McNamaman, he could probably go out, because he's such a naturally fit bloke. He could probably go out tomorrow morning and run one if he put his mind to it.
Even now.
He says he could. Yeah, he is. I think he is a bit freaky like that as a physical specimen.
Wow.
Yeah, I remember Robbie Mustoe, who of course American audiences will know well from his work with NBC, saying that he always had the job when he was at Middlesbrough. He had to mark the opposition's danger man and try to snuff him out the game. And he said most weeks he did a pretty good job of it, but every time he came across Steve McNamaman, he was just absolutely shattered after an hour of trying to keep tabs on him. So, yeah, and I think he was a good 800-meter runner as well, Steve, when he was younger. I think he even beat Curtis Robb, who went on to represent Great Britain at 800 meters. So yeah, we're digressing a little bit here. But yeah, running the marathon, I think in commentary terms, I'd pick out 3 football commentaries. I mean, calling that Aguero goal, last kick of the season for Manchester City to win the title in such dramatic circumstances. The Germany's 7-1 win over Brazil was just incredible. I remember putting the microphone down and saying to Steve McNamaman that day, look, people are going to be talking about this game in 50 years' time, and we had the privilege of covering that. I mean, Brazil are trying to forget it, of course, and will forever. And the USA Algeria game, and I'd mentioned too this season, and that was amazing, doing the Barcelona game where they scored 3 in the last 7 minutes to get past Paris Saint-Germain. So, yeah, we had 1 or 2 beers out with the Barcelona fans that night till about 2 a.m. Largely
really?
because we couldn't get back to the hotel. So what else was there to do? No game the next night.
Yeah, I mean, it must have been a riot in Barcelona that night.
It was. It was one of them pinch yourself things. Saying, did that really happen?
Yeah.
Yes, it did.
I mean, I know. I wasn't even watching the game because I just figured it was a foregone conclusion. Like, nothing's gonna happen. And then I received a bunch of text messages like, "Are you watching this?" And I was like, "What?"
I think that's a great thing with Twitter these days. Obviously, there are a lot of trolls and a bit of poison going on, but when there's a great game going on, it can be very useful because it quite quickly gets around, and you can, from a TV channel's point of view, you can pick up an audience very quickly.
Yeah, it's so true.
Yeah.
Who, if you could have dinner with 3 people, and this can't be family,
Oh, no.
who would you have it with, and
Can
why?
they be alive or dead?
Alive or dead?
Well, Muhammad Ali would have to be one, wouldn't he?
Yeah.
Muhammad Ali would have to be one. Well, I needed prior notice of this question, I think, really. I'm going to pick a Pompey hero of my childhood, Jimmy Dickinson, who played 764 games for Pompey. And
well, please explain that, because I don't know who that is.
To him. He played 48 times for England. 764 times in various divisions for Portsmouth, but he was part of the team that won the championship 2 years running. So I'd love to talk to him about all of that. And he was, they called him Gentleman Jim. He was a lovely guy. So yeah, it would be nice to chat with him. And then I guess I'd have to pick somebody from the, I don't know, Robert Redford or somebody like that about the movie world. That would
Is
be,
that your favorite actor?
But hey, look, there were 3 people right off the top of my head, so I reserve the right to change those.
All right.
Nelson Mandela, he's got to be there, hasn't he?
Yeah.
He's on everybody's dinner list.
Yeah, I mean, one of the most interesting men ever, no doubt about that.
Yeah, if not the great Martin Luther King.
I mean,
What a
and Muhammad Ali.
man.
I mean, you've
President
picked quite
Kennedy.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yes. Yeah, as I say,
Yeah.
it's one of those you need to think about for about 4 weeks before you come up with your final list.
Yeah,
isn't it?
right. What do you want your legacy to be?
Oh, I'm very happy if my fellow broadcasters think that I was pretty good at my job. That would be fair enough for me. I don't seek stardom or adulation. Though, if we're all honest, we've all got an ego and we quite like a little bit of it. So, yeah, I think the respect of my fellow broadcasters, as I hope I respect most of them.
And so, what is something that motivates you now that you've done pretty much all the big games that you have? What motivates you to keep doing it?
I just still enjoy the art of broadcasting, and I still think I'm learning things. I'm probably not as good as I was maybe 10 years ago, but I am still in love with football. I'm still intrigued by it. I still revere the people who can play it at that level, and I still want to be around those games. So the motivation is easy. Now, I think I'll probably have that to my dying day.
And what's for the people listening, what's something you'd like them to do? If there's anything you'd like to encourage or a thought you'd like to leave them with? Any request?
The people who are listening to the broadcasts. I think it's sometimes as a commentator, I don't think they sometimes understand the problems that the commentator has in calling a game, or they imagine that the commentator is biased in some way to one team or another, as they sometimes imagine the referees are. Of course they're not. I don't care. I can't care about the result. It's hard enough calling the match. My job is to call the match. So you just wish people understand that you've got a lot of problems. You've got a director in your headphones. You've got players to identify, controversial moments to call. You're never going to have people agreeing with everything that you're coming up with. So maybe a little bit more understanding from some of those. And I say it's only some people who can get a little bit vicious on Twitter. I know 1 or 2 commentators who will look at Twitter during matches, which I think is a horrible mistake to make, because it can really undermine your confidence to do that.
Yeah.
And shatter you a little bit mentally. We're only human beings in the end, so if people are being particularly nasty about you, that is not a welcome development. So I'd like people to have a little bit of charm and grace and not be too poisonous with it, really. In the end, it's sport and we should enjoy it. If that sounds a bit Corinthian, sorry, but maybe we should all just calm down a little bit without losing any of the fire or passion.
And how can fans reach you or contact you or interact with you if they want to?
Well, I'm on at Ian Darke on Twitter. And I try to respond to a few. Obviously, you can't reply to them all. If anybody swears at me or makes a libelous allegation, I'm liable to block them, because I don't think you should have to tolerate that. But if people ask you a reasonable question and it's a reasonable observation about something you've said, I will try to reply. So at Ian Darke, that's me. With a little tick even beside it now.
Okay.
Somebody arranged that. I don't know how. How does that work?
I don't know.
You get that little blue tick to prove you're not
I don't know.
a fake or imposter.
I guess. Yeah, there might be some fake Ian Darke accounts.
Yeah, I can't think why anybody'd want to do that, but there you are.
Well, I want to thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. It's been an absolute pleasure.
For me too. Great chatting, and I think the score's moved on to 95 for no wicket. There, after only 14 overs. You've missed some great cricket while
yeah,
you've been talking to me here.
I wouldn't have understood
Here
it
at the
anyway,
cricket ground.
honestly.
Just to recap, everybody, we're watching a cricket match as we talk.
Yeah, maybe I might have you give some commentary now.
Yeah, I could commentate on cricket, actually, but
Yeah?
I never have.
No?
There
Would
we
you
are.
like to at some point?
Yeah, it would be fun.
All right,
It would be fun.
Let's do one bowl.
Okay, all
all
right,
right.
let's give the bowler a name. Let's say it's Brown. Brown coming in now from the pavilion end and bowls to Fox, who's this time is pulling this away for 4 runs through the mid-wicket area. Good shot, which will take the score on to 96 for no wicket. And that batsman's just moved on to 49. I'm never going to make it. I stick to football.
I would say something, but I really have no idea
See, I got the
what
score
is
wrong.
happening.
It went on to 100. So they were slow with the scoreboard.
Okay. Well, it was a great hit. That's what I would have said. A great hit.
Everybody's turned off now, by the way.
Yeah. All right. I'll let you go.
Good talking to you, Josh.
All right.
Take care.
If you like the show, please subscribe on Stitcher, Podcast Addict, iTunes, whatever podcast app you have. Also, if you enjoyed the show, please check out my page on Facebook, The Football Camino. Leave a comment, give a suggestion. Everyone is welcome. Please connect with me there. Or on my Twitter handle, which is @FootballCamino. So, get in touch, and I'd love to hear from you. And you can also subscribe to my newsletter, which gives you behind-the-scenes look at how I did the interview and other information that never made it out into the published episode. So please check that out on my website at thefootballcamino.com.